I
We use
still
cloth
remember the
napkins here,
exact
Brenda.
moment my daughter-in-law looked at me across a room full
This
of guests
isn't one of your little
and said,
barbecues.
maybe if Tessa had planned her own retirement better, she wouldn't need to depend on everyone else. The laughter that followed felt louder than the music. My son lowered his eyes. My granddaughter stopped eating, and I stood there holding the apple pie I had baked, wondering how a woman who had spent 40 years caring for her family had become an embarrassment. I walked away before anyone could see me cry. That was when I found the old envelope hidden inside a desk drawer. My late husband Michael's handwriting was on the front. And after I read that letter, nothing in my son's house would ever be the same again. If this story touches you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And while you listen, I would truly love to know how you feel about what happened. Have you ever been embarrassed by someone you loved? Please share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world tonight. My name is Tessa McDonald, and by the time this story began, I was 67 years old and living alone in the small house my husband and I had bought nearly 40 years earlier. The house sat on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio. The maple tree Michael planted when our son Daniel was born still stood in the front yard. Every fall, its leaves covered the lawn in shades of red and gold, and every year, I told myself I would finally cut it down because the branches had become too heavy. But I never did. It was the last thing Michael had planted with his own hands. My husband died 6 years before the night that changed everything. Michael McDonald had been a civil engineer. He was the kind of man who could fix almost anything. He repaired our roof himself, built bookshelves for our living room, and spent entire weekends teaching Daniel how to use a hammer. When cancer took him, it happened faster than either of us expected. Even now, some mornings I still reach toward his side of the bed before remembering it had been empty for years. People often assume grief becomes easier with time. It doesn't. It simply becomes quieter. After Michael passed away, I retired from teaching 3rd grade. I had spent nearly 35 years inside elementary school classrooms. Children had always filled my days with noise questions and laughter. Retirement felt less like freedom and more like someone had suddenly turned the volume down on my life. Daniel tried to visit during the first year after his father's death. At least he tried. He lived about 40 minutes away with his wife Rebecca and their daughter Olivia. He worked long hours for an insurance company, and Rebecca had built a successful career as a real estate agent. Life moved quickly for them. Meanwhile, mine seemed to stand still. The invitation to their housewarming party arrived 3 weeks before the event. Rebecca had written, "We're finally celebrating our dream home. We'd love for you to come." The words were polite, but something about them felt cold. Perhaps it was because Rebecca had not called me herself. Perhaps it was because she had signed only her name. Or perhaps I simply knew her too well. I first met Rebecca 12 years earlier. She was beautiful, confident, and incredibly ambitious. She spoke quickly, dressed perfectly, and always seemed to know exactly what she wanted. Daniel fell in love almost immediately. Michael liked her. I tried to. But from the beginning, I felt something I could never explain. Rebecca never seemed interested in people unless they could help her move forward. Conversations always returned to money, success, neighborhoods, promotions, appearances, or status. She was never openly rude, not then. She simply made people feel small without raising her voice. After Michael died, the distance between us became greater. She stopped inviting me to dinners as often. Holiday gatherings became shorter. Sometimes weeks passed without hearing from them. Only Olivia kept reaching for me. My granddaughter had inherited Michael's gentle heart. She loved baking cookies in my kitchen and listening to stories about her grandfather. At 10 years old, she still hugged me tightly every time she visited. Those hugs often carried me through entire weeks. The morning of the party, I woke up before sunrise. I stood in my kitchen wearing Michael's old blue robe and stared at the invitation card sitting beside the coffee maker. Part of me wanted to stay home. I could already imagine Rebecca introducing me to guests with that careful smile she wore whenever she wanted to appear kind. I could already hear myself saying I was fine. Older women become very skilled at saying they are fine. But I loved my son, and I loved my granddaughter. So I decided to go. I spent the morning baking Michael's favorite apple pie recipe. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen. As I peeled apples, memories returned one after another. Daniel sitting on the counter as a little boy. Michael stealing pieces of dough. Christmas mornings. Family dinners. The years when our home was loud. I suddenly realized that I had spent most of my life taking care of everyone else. When Daniel broke his arm at age 11, I slept in a hospital chair. When Michael lost his job during a recession, I worked extra tutoring hours. When my mother became ill, I cared for her until she passed away. Women of my generation were taught that love meant sacrifice. We gave first. We needed later. Sometimes we never needed at all. At least that was what we told ourselves. Around noon, my best friend, Margaret Hayes, called. Margaret and I had known each other for over 40 years. She had taught 5th grade across the hall from me. "Tessa," she said, "you sound nervous." "I'm not nervous." "You've reorganized your kitchen 3 times this morning, haven't you?" I laughed. "Maybe." "You don't have to go if they don't make you feel welcome. They're my family." There was silence on the other end. Finally, Margaret said quietly, "Sometimes we stay in places that hurt us because we remember who people used to be." Her words stayed with me. By 3 o'clock, I wrapped the apple pie carefully. I also bought Olivia a small silver bracelet with tiny heart charms. It wasn't expensive, but I knew she would love it. As I dressed, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. I wore a navy blue dress that Michael had always liked. My gray hair rested just above my shoulders. Age spots covered my hands. For a moment, I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me. She seemed tired, lonely, smaller than she once had been. But then I remembered something Michael often told me. "You stand taller than you realize, Tess." I picked up my purse. Before leaving, I walked into Michael's old workshop in the garage. Most of his tools still hung exactly where he left them. His workbench remained covered with pencils, measuring tapes, and unfinished projects. I touched the corner of the bench. "I wish you were here," I whispered. The drive to Daniel's new house took 45 minutes. The neighborhood was beautiful. Large homes, fresh landscaping, perfect sidewalks. Everything looked expensive. As I turned onto their street, I saw dozens of cars parked outside. Rebecca had invited far more guests than I expected. I sat inside my car for several minutes. Through the windows, I could see people laughing. Music played. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath the lights. For reasons I couldn't explain, my hands began to shake. I suddenly remembered the first Thanksgiving after Michael died. Rebecca had said, "It's probably better if we keep things smaller this year." Smaller had meant I wasn't invited. Daniel apologized later. He always apologized later. Never at the moment things happened. Never when it mattered. I took a deep breath, picked up the pie, held Olivia's gift tightly, and walked toward the front door of my son's beautiful new house. I had no idea that before the evening ended, my life, my marriage, and everything Michael had left behind would begin to reveal secrets I never imagined existed. The front door opened before I even reached it. Olivia came running toward me. "Grandma." She wrapped her arms around my waist so tightly that I almost dropped the pie. For a moment, all the anxiety I had carried during the drive disappeared. "There's my favorite girl," I said, kissing the top of her head. "You came. Of course I came." She noticed the gift bag immediately. "Is that for me? You'll have to wait until later." She grinned and grabbed my hand. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the way I had imagined. Expensive hardwood floors, tall ceilings, a crystal chandelier, fresh flowers arranged perfectly on every table. Soft music played through hidden speakers. There were probably 30 people there already. Some were Daniel's co-workers. Others were Rebecca's clients, neighbors, and friends. Most of them wore expensive clothes and carried glasses of wine. I suddenly felt underdressed even though I had spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear. Rebecca appeared from the dining room. She looked elegant in a cream-colored dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. "Tessa," she said with a smile. The smile reached her mouth, but not her eyes. "You made it. I wouldn't miss it." She glanced at the pie. "Oh, you brought dessert." Her tone made it sound almost unnecessary. "Yes. Michael's apple pie recipe." "Oh." She turned toward the kitchen. "We actually ordered desserts from a bakery downtown, but I'm sure someone will eat it." Someone. Not we. Not the family. Someone. Small words sometimes hurt more than large ones. Daniel appeared behind her. "Mom!" He hugged me quickly, too quickly. He seemed distracted. There were dark circles under his eyes that I had never noticed before. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you, sweetheart." He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something else, but Rebecca called his name from across the room. "Daniel, the Petersons just arrived." He nodded. "I'll talk to you later, Mom." And then he walked away. I stood alone in the entryway holding my purse. For several seconds, nobody spoke to me. Nobody knew who I was. I was simply another older woman standing near the front door. Finally, Olivia took my hand again. "Come see my room." Her excitement saved me. Upstairs, she showed me her new bedroom. The walls were painted pale blue. Books sat neatly on white shelves. A small desk stood beside the window. "Do you like it?" she asked. "It's beautiful." She sat beside me on the bed. "Grandma?" "Yes. Are you staying for dinner?" "Of course." She looked relieved. "Good." "Why?" Olivia hesitated. "I just wanted you to stay. Children often understand things adults refuse to see." I touched her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere." At least, that was what I believed. When we returned downstairs, more guests had arrived. Rebecca was giving people tours of the house. "This is the custom kitchen. These cabinets were imported. We completely redesigned the entire first floor." People admired everything, and Rebecca enjoyed every second of it. Several guests gathered near the fireplace. Rebecca noticed me standing nearby. "Oh, everyone, this is Daniel's mother, Tessa." The group smiled politely. A woman in a green dress extended her hand. "I'm Emily Lawson. It's nice to meet you." Emily seemed warm and genuine. "So, you raised Daniel?" "I did." "Well, you must be proud." Before I could answer, Rebecca laughed softly. "Oh, Daniel mostly raised himself after college. He's always been independent." The words sounded harmless, but they weren't. I remembered the extra jobs I worked to pay tuition, the nights I stayed awake helping him study, the years after Michael lost work. But I simply smiled. "Yes, Daniel has always worked hard." A man beside Emily spoke. "This house is incredible. You must be proud of your son." "I am." Rebecca immediately answered. "It took a lot of sacrifice." She emphasized the word. "A lot of financial planning." I noticed Daniel glance toward her. Something uncomfortable passed between them. Emily turned to me. "Do you live nearby? About 45 minutes away." "Oh, that's not too far." "No." Rebecca sipped her wine. Tessa likes staying in her old house. The way she said old made it sound like a disease. I looked toward the kitchen. I've lived there a long time. Well, Rebecca said some people don't enjoy change. Again, several guests laughed politely. Not because the joke was funny, because Rebecca expected them to. I suddenly remembered another moment from years earlier. Michael and I had visited Daniel shortly after his engagement. Rebecca had been discussing neighborhoods. She asked us where we had lived when we first married. Michael proudly described our little starter home. Rebecca smiled. Oh, I could never live somewhere that small. Michael had laughed. But later he told me that girl measures everything. At the time, I thought he meant houses. Now I wondered if he meant people. As the afternoon continued, I watched Daniel. He seemed nervous. He checked his phone repeatedly. He drank more than usual. Every time Rebecca spoke, he became quieter. At one point, I found him alone in the kitchen. You okay? He smiled weakly. Just tired. Work, something like that? I wanted to ask more. I wanted to ask why he looked unhappy in the middle of his dream home. But Rebecca entered the room. There you are. She handed him a list. Can you check on the caterers? Sure. He looked at me. Sorry, Mom. For what? But he was already leaving. The sun began setting outside. The house glowed with warm light. People laughed. Music played. Champagne glasses clinked. Yet the entire evening felt strangely artificial, as if everyone were performing, as if no one wanted to admit what they truly felt. Then something happened that stayed with me. An older couple entered through the front door. Rebecca greeted them enthusiastically. This is Stephen and Emily Lawson. I realized Emily had returned after stepping outside. Stephen shook Daniel's hand. Then he looked at me. You must be Daniel's mother. Yes. He smiled warmly. Then this beautiful home exists because of you. Rebecca's expression changed instantly. Oh, Daniel and I built this ourselves. Stephen laughed. Well, parents usually deserve some credit. Rebecca took another sip of wine. Some parents help more than others. The room became quiet. It was only for a second, but I felt it. Daniel heard it too. He looked directly at his wife. Rebecca smiled as though nothing had happened. Olivia came over and slipped her hand into mine. Grandma. Yes. Can you sit next to me at dinner? Of course. She looked relieved again. I squeezed her hand gently. Then I noticed something strange. Near the staircase sat a framed photograph. It showed Daniel, Rebecca, and Olivia standing in front of the new house. But there wasn't a single family picture anywhere else. No wedding photographs, no pictures of Michael, no pictures of our family Christmases, nothing. It was as though the past had been carefully removed, as though Daniel had begun his life only after Rebecca arrived. I suddenly felt a deep sadness, because homes are not only built with money, they're built with memories. And somehow every memory that included Michael had disappeared. As dinner approached, guests moved toward the dining room. Rebecca stood at the head of the table, smiling confidently. The candles were lit. The wine was poured. The conversation became louder. And although I did not realize it then, the evening was quietly moving toward the moment that would change all of our lives. The humiliation had not happened yet, but I could already feel it approaching, like distant thunder before a storm. Dinner began just after 7. The dining room was beautiful. Rebecca had arranged everything perfectly. White candles burned in crystal holders. Gold napkins rested beside polished silverware. Fresh roses stood in the center of the long table. There were 12 seats. Rebecca sat at one end. Daniel sat beside her. I was placed near the opposite end beside Emily and her husband Stephen. Olivia sat next to me. For a while, everything seemed normal. People talked about travel work retirement and the housing market. Rebecca moved easily from conversation to conversation, laughing at exactly the right moments. She was good at entertaining. Very good. Several times, I almost convinced myself that my fears had been foolish. Then Stephen asked a simple question. So, Tessa, what did you do before retirement? I was an elementary school teacher. For how long? 35 years. His eyes widened. That's incredible. Emily smiled. No wonder Olivia loves you so much. Olivia nodded immediately. Grandma taught me to read. My heart warmed. Rebecca took a sip of wine. Tessa has always had a lot of free time with Olivia. I looked at her. Well, retirement gives me more time. Of course, she said. Some people are fortunate enough to stop working early. Something in her tone made Emily glance toward me. I answered calmly. I retired at 62. Rebecca smiled. That must be nice. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The caterers brought the main course. Conversations resumed. Yet I could feel Rebecca watching me, almost studying me, as if she were waiting for something. Emily asked me another question. Do you still live in the family home? Yes. That must hold so many memories. It does. Before I could continue, Rebecca laughed. I honestly don't know how she does it. Everyone looked at her. That old house needs so much work. She turned toward one of her clients. You should have seen it. Everything is so outdated. I smiled politely. Michael and I always loved it. Of course. She nodded. But sometimes people become attached to things they really should let go of. The sentence seemed aimed directly at me. Daniel lowered his eyes. I waited for him to say something. Anything. He remained silent. The silence hurt almost as much as Rebecca's words. Stephen changed the subject. This neighborhood is beautiful. Rebecca brightened immediately. Oh, we were very selective. She began describing property values, school districts, and investment potential. Several guests listened with admiration. One woman asked, Did your families help with the house? Rebecca answered before Daniel could speak. No, Daniel and I did this ourselves. I saw Daniel's hand tighten around his fork. He looked at his plate. The conversation continued. Then Emily smiled at me. You must be proud. Your son has done very well. I nodded. I am proud of him. Rebecca tilted her head. Well, Daniel worked very hard to get where he is. Nobody disagreed. She continued. Success doesn't just happen. You have to make good financial decisions. Something in her voice changed. The room became quieter. You can't spend your whole life depending on other people. Daniel looked up. Rebecca. What? She laughed softly. We're just talking. My stomach tightened. For years, women learn to recognize danger before it arrives, the same way you can smell rain before a storm. I suddenly knew something bad was coming. Emily spoke carefully. I think family support is important. Of course, Rebecca said. She smiled. But sometimes parents become too dependent on their children. My hand froze around my water glass. Nobody spoke. Rebecca looked directly at me. I mean, retirement is expensive now, Daniel whispered Rebecca. She ignored him. People really need to plan ahead instead of expecting their children to solve everything. The room became completely silent. My face grew warm. Emily looked uncomfortable. Stephen stared at his plate. Olivia stopped eating. I could hardly breathe, because every person at that table understood exactly who Rebecca was talking about. Me, the woman who had paid for Daniel's braces, the woman who had worked weekends to help him attend college, the woman who had sat beside Michael during chemotherapy, the woman holding her granddaughter's hand beneath the table. Rebecca continued. Honestly, one of the hardest things about adulthood is setting boundaries. Daniel finally spoke. That's enough. She turned toward him. What, I'm just being honest? I looked at my son. Please, say something, defend me. Tell them the truth. Tell them I never asked for money. Tell them I paid my own bills. Tell them I had spent my life giving, not taking. Daniel opened his mouth. Then he looked around the table. He saw the guests, the clients, the neighbors, and he said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Rebecca smiled again. You know, Tessa still lives alone in that big house. Sometimes I tell Daniel that people need to make practical decisions. My chest hurt. I like my house. Of course. She shrugged. But at some point, people have to face reality. Emily finally spoke. I think everyone deserves to live where they're happy. Rebecca laughed. That's easy to say when you aren't responsible for them. The word responsible hit me like a slap. Responsible. As if I were a burden. As if my existence had become a problem. Olivia suddenly stood. Grandma isn't a burden. The entire room turned toward her. Rebecca's face hardened. Olivia. But she isn't. Daniel looked shocked. My granddaughter's eyes filled with tears. She makes cookies with me. She helps me with school. Rebecca spoke sharply. Sit down. Olivia slowly sat. I squeezed her hand. Inside, my heart was breaking. Not because of Rebecca, but because a 10-year-old child was the only person at the table willing to defend me. Rebecca reached for her wine again. Perhaps she had drunk too much. Or perhaps she had simply stopped caring. She looked directly at me. You know, sometimes people refuse to accept that they've become dependent on everyone around them. I heard someone inhale sharply. Emily looked horrified. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. Daniel whispered, Please stop. Rebecca ignored him. Then she said the sentence I will never forget. Maybe if Tessa had planned her retirement better, she wouldn't need everyone else to take care of her. A few nervous laughs escaped from one side of the table. Not because it was funny, because people often laugh when they feel trapped. I sat perfectly still. My ears rang. My vision blurred. I looked at Daniel, my son, the little boy I once carried to bed after nightmares, the young man I had believed would always protect me. He could not meet my eyes. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It simply broke. I placed my napkin beside my plate. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I stood slowly. Tessa Emily said softly. I smiled at her. Excuse me. Rebecca sighed. Oh, come on. I didn't mean anything. I looked at her, for the first time all evening, and I realized something. She truly believed she had done nothing wrong. That frightened me more than the humiliation itself. I turned toward Daniel. He still said nothing, not one word. I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I heard Olivia call softly. Grandma, I couldn't answer, because if I had opened my mouth, I would have started crying. I walked down the hallway, past family photographs that no longer included Michael, past expensive decorations, past walls that suddenly felt cold. I needed air. I needed privacy. I needed somewhere to breathe. And without realizing it, I walked toward a small office near the back of the house. The door stood partially open. Inside, a desk drawer had been left slightly ajar. And inside that drawer, waiting for me, after all these years, was an old envelope, one that would change everything. The office was dark except for the small lamp glowing on the corner of the desk. I closed the door behind me. For several seconds, I simply stood there trying to steady my breathing. Through the wall, I could still hear voices from the dining room. The guests had started talking again. Dishes clinked. Someone laughed nervously. Life had continued without me. I leaned against the desk and wiped my eyes. At 67 years old, I had thought I understood pain. I had buried my husband. I had buried my parents. I had watched friends become widows. I had sat beside hospital beds. But there is a unique kind of pain that comes when your own child watches someone hurt you and does nothing. That pain feels personal, permanent. I looked around the room. It was clearly Daniel's office. A laptop sat on the desk. Several insurance files were stacked neatly beside a printer. A framed picture of Olivia rested near the lamp. But there was something strange. The room didn't feel like Daniel. My son had always been messy. He kept books everywhere. He loved baseball magazines. Michael used to joke that Daniel organized papers by throwing them into piles. This office looked carefully controlled, almost staged. I walked toward the bookshelf. Several business books lined the shelves: real estate guides, investment books, leadership manuals. Not a single family photograph. Not one. The silence inside the room felt heavy. I sat down in the chair behind the desk. For a moment, I simply stared at my hands. My wedding ring still rested on my finger. Many widows remove theirs. I never could. Michael had been gone 6 years, but some part of me still spoke to him every day. I looked toward the slightly open desk drawer. Perhaps if I had been calmer, I would never have noticed it. But grief sharpens strange instincts. Something white inside the drawer caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a bill or a document. I reached down and gently pulled the drawer open. Inside lay several folders, a checkbook, some envelopes, and beneath them, an old cream-colored envelope. My breath stopped. I knew that handwriting immediately. Michael. The same careful letters I had seen for 43 years. The same handwriting that filled anniversary cards, birthday notes, lunchbox messages for Daniel. I picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. On the front, written in blue ink, were 4 words. For Daniel when necessary. I stared at it. Michael had been dead for 6 years. How could his letter be here? Why had I never seen it? The paper felt old. The edges had begun to yellow. I turned it over. The seal had already been opened. Someone had read it. My stomach tightened. Rebecca, Daniel, or both. The room suddenly felt colder. I carefully removed the folded pages inside. There were 3 sheets. The first line made tears fill my eyes immediately. Son, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to speak to you myself. Michael's voice returned instantly. I could almost hear him. His steady tone, his calm manner, his patience. I continued reading. Life will eventually place you in a position where you must decide what kind of man you want to become. Success, money, and beautiful houses mean very little if you lose your character. My hands began to shake. Outside the office, footsteps passed. I quickly looked toward the door. No one entered. I kept reading. Your mother has given you more than either of us could ever repay. She sacrificed dreams, sleep comfort, and security so you could have opportunities that we never had. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Because Michael had understood. He had always seen me, even when I did not see myself. The letter continued. If I leave anything behind financially, I ask only one thing from you. Honor your mother. Protect her dignity. Never allow anyone to make her feel unwanted. I covered my mouth. Those words echoed inside my head. Never allow anyone to make her feel unwanted. Only minutes earlier, my own son had done exactly that. Not with words, but with silence. I read further. There may come a day when someone convinces you that success matters more than family. If that day comes, remember who sat beside your bed when you were sick. Remember who worked extra hours to send you to college. Remember who loved you before you earned anything. I closed my eyes. Memories flooded back. Daniel at 17. Daniel graduating. Michael proudly hugging him. All the years we had believed we were building something together. The sound of the office door suddenly startled me. I quickly folded the papers. The door opened slightly. Olivia stood there. Grandma? Her small voice nearly broke my heart. I forced a smile. Hi, sweetheart. She entered quietly. Are you crying? I nodded. A little. She walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I don't like when Mom talks to you that way. I held her tightly. It's okay. No, it isn't. Children often speak truths adults avoid. She noticed the letter in my hand. What's that? I looked down. It's something Grandpa wrote. Her eyes widened. Grandpa Michael. Yes. She smiled softly. I wish I knew him better. So do I. She sat beside me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something that frightened me. I think Mom and Dad argued about that letter. I looked at her immediately. What do you mean? She lowered her voice. A few weeks ago. When? After we moved. What did you hear? She hesitated. I wasn't supposed to listen. It's okay. Dad said it wasn't right. My heart began beating faster. What wasn't right? She looked toward the door. Mom said Grandpa's rules didn't matter anymore. Rules, not letter. Rules. My hands tightened around the paper. What rules? Olivia shook her head. I don't know. At that exact moment, footsteps approached. Olivia immediately stood. Rebecca's voice echoed from the hallway. Olivia? The child looked frightened. I'm here, Mom. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. She looked at me. Then she looked at the envelope. For one brief second, her face changed. Not anger, not embarrassment, fear. Actual fear. She recovered quickly. There you are. Her smile returned. We were wondering where you went. I said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed on the letter. What's that? I held the envelope carefully. It belonged to Michael. Something passed across her face again. She walked farther into the room. Oh. Only one word, but it carried tension. I didn't know that was still here. Still here, as if she had expected it to disappear. Olivia spoke. It's from Grandpa. Rebecca immediately interrupted. Olivia, why don't you help Emily with dessert? I want to stay with Grandma. Now. The little girl looked at me. I squeezed her hand. It's okay. She slowly left. Rebecca and I stood alone. The silence between us felt different now. No longer uncomfortable, dangerous. She folded her arms. You should probably come back to dinner. I looked down at the pages, then back at her. Did you read this? For the first time that evening, Rebecca seemed uncertain, only for a moment. Then she smiled. I don't know what you're talking about, but I suddenly knew one thing. The fear in her eyes had not come from my tears. It had come from Michael's words, and whatever was written in the rest of that letter had frightened her long before I ever walked into that office. Rebecca stood in the doorway with her arms folded. The soft light from the hallway fell across her face, and for the first time that evening, she looked genuinely unsettled. Not angry, not embarrassed, afraid. I had known this woman for 12 years. I had watched her negotiate with contractors, challenge sales agents, and argue with insurance companies. Rebecca Carter McDonald rarely lost control of a situation. Yet the sight of Michael's letter had clearly shaken her. She forced another smile. You should probably come back before people start worrying. I looked down at the pages in my hand. Did you read this? Her expression hardened slightly. No. You opened the envelope. It was already opened. I met her eyes. She looked away first. Outside the office, I could hear the distant sound of dishes being cleared. The party was continuing, but suddenly it felt very far away. Rebecca stepped farther into the room. Tessa, tonight isn't really the time for this. The time for what? She sighed. For old family issues. Old family issues, as though Michael's words were simply outdated opinions. As though the man who had built our family had become an inconvenience. I carefully folded the first page. Olivia said you and Daniel argued about this letter. Her face changed again. Children misunderstand things. Did you read it? She remained silent. That silence answered me. Several moments passed. Finally, she said, Daniel can explain everything. The word everything echoed in my head. Everything. Not something. Not misunderstanding. Everything. Before I could speak again, Daniel appeared in the doorway. His face looked pale. He glanced at me, then at Rebecca, then at the envelope. His entire body seemed to freeze. For a moment, nobody spoke. I suddenly understood. Daniel had known. Perhaps not all of it, but enough. Oh, God, he whispered. Rebecca immediately spoke. We can discuss this later. When? I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom. When? He looked exhausted. Not tonight. I held up the envelope. My husband wrote this 6 years ago. Rebecca folded her arms tighter. Michael was worried about you. The sentence felt strange. Worried about me. She nodded. He didn't want you to be alone. I looked at Daniel. What does that mean? Daniel sat heavily in the chair beside the desk. For several seconds, he said nothing. The silence inside the room felt unbearable. Finally, he spoke. Dad set up a trust. My heart stopped. A what? A family trust. I stared at him. Michael had never mentioned a trust. Never. During his illness, we had discussed medical bills, insurance savings, and retirement accounts. But not this. I sat slowly. Before he died. Why didn't he tell me? Daniel lowered his eyes. He wanted to protect you. Rebecca spoke. He didn't want you to worry. I ignored her. Protect me from what? Daniel swallowed. He left money. I felt as though the air had disappeared from the room. Money. Michael and I had never been wealthy. We had been comfortable, careful, practical. He had worked as an engineer. I had been a teacher. We paid bills, saved when possible, helped Daniel through college. There had never been large amounts of money. At least that was what I believed. "How much?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. Rebecca answered. "Enough!" I looked directly at her. "How much?" Daniel finally spoke. "About $600,000. I could not breathe. 600,000. Michael had left $600,000, and I had never known. My hands began trembling. How? Dad had several investments, life insurance, retirement accounts. I stared at him. Why didn't he tell me? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He was afraid you'd give everything away. That sounded like Michael. I had spent my entire life helping people. My sister, my parents, former students, friends. He had often joked that if I won the lottery, everyone else would become rich first. I looked down at the letter. The next page suddenly seemed much heavier. "Where is the money?" Neither of them answered immediately, and that frightened me. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "Some of it was used." "Used for what?" Rebecca answered. "The house." The room became completely silent. I stared at her. "Our house." The words felt unreal. My mind moved backward through the evening. The expensive kitchen, the custom cabinets, the marble counters, the wine, the guests, the speeches, the humiliation. My husband's money. I looked at Daniel. "Michael paid for this house." "No," Rebecca spoke quickly. "Not entirely." "How much?" Daniel closed his eyes. 250,000. I felt physically ill. The down payment, the housewarming party, the discussions about success, the comments about responsibility. My husband's money had helped buy the house where I had just been publicly humiliated. I stood. Daniel rose immediately. "Mom, sit down." He froze. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, my voice sounded exactly the way it had when he was a child. I looked toward Rebecca. "You knew." She crossed her arms. Daniel had every legal right. "I didn't ask about Daniel." She said nothing. "You knew." Michael trusted his son. He trusted his son to take care of his mother. Her jaw tightened. The words had landed, because both of us had read them. I looked back at the second page. My eyes found another paragraph. "If you use these resources to build your future, remember that your mother is part of that future. She should never feel abandoned, ignored, or humiliated." Humiliated. The exact word. Michael had written it years before his death, as if somehow he had seen tonight. Daniel was crying now. Real tears. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" "I don't know." "After she embarrassed me tonight." "No." "After I died." "Mom, please." I had never seen my son look so broken. But my own heart felt broken too. Rebecca spoke again. "We've supported you." I turned toward her. "Supported me." She looked uncomfortable. "We help when we can." "I pay my own bills." "I didn't mean—" "I have never asked you for money." Daniel whispered, "Mom." I continued. "I paid for your college." "I know. I worked weekends." "I know. I took care of your father while he died." His shoulders began shaking. "I know." "Then why?" He covered his face, and finally the truth began to emerge. I was afraid. Of what? He looked toward Rebecca. Everything. The answer surprised me, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple. My son was afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of losing his marriage. Afraid of disappointing his wife. Afraid of choosing sides. And because he was afraid, he had allowed me to stand alone. Rebecca spoke quietly. This isn't fair. I looked at her. What isn't fair? You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Did pressure make you humiliate me? She looked away. I turned back to the letter. At the bottom of the page, Michael had written, "Character is revealed by how we treat those who no longer have power over us." I read the sentence twice, 3 times. No longer have power. Perhaps that was how Rebecca saw me. An aging widow, a retired teacher, a lonely woman, no influence, no money, no power. Except now I was beginning to realize that Michael had left behind much more than money. He had left instructions, responsibilities, conditions, and perhaps truths that neither Daniel nor Rebecca wanted me to discover. I carefully returned the pages to the envelope. Is there more? I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Where? He looked terrified. Rebecca immediately spoke. We should talk about this another day. I looked directly at her. No. For the first time all evening, my voice felt steady, strong. Tonight. Because something inside me had changed. The woman who entered this house carrying an apple pie had wanted only love. The woman now holding Michael's letter wanted the truth. And I was beginning to suspect that the truth was much larger than either Daniel or Rebecca had ever intended me to discover. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The office suddenly felt much smaller than it had only minutes earlier. Daniel sat in the chair with his hands covering his face. Rebecca stood beside the bookshelf, her expression guarded and cold, and I stood between them holding Michael's letter, as though it were the only solid thing left in my world. $250,000. My husband's money. Money that had helped purchase this beautiful home. The same home where I had just been humiliated. I looked around the office again. The expensive desk, the custom shelves, the leather chair. Everything felt different now. Not because the furniture had changed, because the truth had. When were you planning to tell me? I asked quietly. Daniel lowered his hands. I don't know. You've had 6 years. I know. You watched me struggle after your father died. His voice cracked. I know. There were months I worried about medical bills. I know. I sold Michael's truck because I thought I needed the money. Tears filled his eyes. I know. The room became silent again. One question kept repeating itself in my mind. Why? Why would Michael hide this from me? And why would Daniel keep it hidden? I looked back down at the remaining pages. There was something else attached behind the letter. Several folded documents. I carefully removed them. The first page contained legal language. I recognized the letterhead immediately. Coleman and Associates, Richard Coleman, Michael's attorney. Richard had handled our will years earlier. I began reading. The words were difficult to understand at first, but one phrase stood out. McDonald Family Trust. My heart pounded. There were signatures, dates, conditions, and beneath them another section. Primary beneficiary Daniel McDonald. I felt another wave of disappointment. But then I kept reading. The next paragraph changed everything. The beneficiary shall maintain a continuing obligation of care, dignity, and support toward Tessa McDonald. I looked up. Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. The trust includes ethical conditions, I asked. He nodded slowly. Yes. Rebecca spoke immediately. Those conditions aren't enforceable. I turned toward her. How do you know? She hesitated. Daniel answered. Because we talked to an attorney. The words hit me like ice water. We. Not Daniel. We. How many conversations had happened behind my back? How many decisions had been made while I sat alone in my house, believing my husband had left us only memories? I continued reading. If the beneficiary knowingly neglects, humiliates, or abandons Tessa McDonald, the trustee may reconsider distribution and control of remaining assets. I stopped breathing. Remaining assets. I looked at Daniel. There is still money left. He nodded. Yes. How much? Rebecca immediately answered. That isn't relevant. I ignored her. Daniel. His voice was barely audible. About $300,000. $300,000, still remaining. The room became completely silent. Suddenly, many things began making sense. Rebecca's fear, Daniel's guilt, the arguments Olivia overheard, the way Rebecca had reacted to the envelope. This wasn't simply about old letters. This was about something still very much alive. I looked at the documents again. Another name appeared. Trustee Richard Coleman. Richard. Michael's old attorney. He was still alive, still practicing law, and apparently still connected to this trust. Have you spoken to Richard? I asked. Daniel shook his head. Not recently. Why not? Rebecca answered. He retired. I asked Daniel. She folded her arms. Fine. Daniel rubbed his forehead. He called a few years ago. What did he want? He wanted to meet. Did you? No. Why? Daniel looked at Rebecca. The answer was written across both of their faces. Rebecca stepped forward. We didn't think it was necessary. She sighed. Tessa Michael was very traditional. I stared at her. He believed old-fashioned things about family. Respecting your mother is old-fashioned. That's not what I said. It sounds exactly like what you said. Daniel stood. Please stop. No. Both of them looked at me. For perhaps the first time in years, my voice did not sound apologetic. It did not sound weak. It sounded like the teacher I had once been, the mother who had raised a child, the woman Michael had loved. I sat at your father's bedside while he died. Daniel lowered his eyes. I know. I held his hand. His shoulders shook. I know. He trusted you. Daniel began crying again. I know. The office door suddenly opened. Olivia stood there. Behind her stood Emily Lawson. Emily looked uncomfortable. I hope I'm not interrupting. Nobody answered. She looked around the room. Her eyes settled on my tears. Then Daniel's. Then Rebecca. Something in her expression changed. She understood. Perhaps not the details, but enough. People are leaving, she said gently. Rebecca immediately recovered her social smile. We'll be out in a minute. Emily didn't move. Instead, she walked toward me. Tessa, are you okay? I wanted to say yes. Women my age often say yes automatically, even when our hearts are breaking. But for some reason, I couldn't. No. The room became quiet. Emily touched my arm. I heard some of what happened at dinner. Rebecca stiffened. It was a misunderstanding. Emily looked directly at her. No, Rebecca. Her voice remained calm. It wasn't. Rebecca's face hardened. This is a private family matter. Emily nodded. Perhaps, but it happened in front of 30 people. No one spoke. Emily continued quietly. Tessa didn't deserve that. Olivia walked beside me and took my hand. I told Mom that too. Rebecca looked exhausted. Can we please not do this now? I looked down again at the trust papers. Another page had been folded inside. This one contained several handwritten notes. Michael's handwriting. I unfolded it carefully. There were only 3 sentences. If Daniel ever forgets where he came from, remind him. If anyone makes you feel small, leave the room. And if you ever feel alone, call Richard. My eyes filled with tears. Call Richard. Michael had expected this. Not every detail. Not Rebecca. Not the house. But somehow he had known. Perhaps he had seen how much Daniel wanted approval. Perhaps he had recognized Rebecca's ambition. Or perhaps he simply understood people better than I did. I folded the paper carefully. Daniel spoke softly. What are you going to do? I honestly didn't know. A few hours earlier, I had arrived carrying an apple pie. Now I was holding documents that could change everything. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to ask Michael why he hadn't trusted me enough to tell me. But another feeling had begun growing quietly inside me. Anger. Not explosive anger. Not revenge. Something colder. Clearer. For 6 years, I had believed I was simply an aging widow, trying not to burden her family. For 6 years, my son and daughter-in-law had known things I did not. And tonight, after publicly humiliating me, Rebecca had expected me to return to the table and pretend everything was fine. I looked directly at Daniel. Did you know the conditions? He nodded. Yes. All of them. Most of them. Did Rebecca know? He hesitated. That hesitation gave me the answer. Rebecca knew. Perhaps from the beginning. Perhaps before the house. Perhaps before tonight. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked the question that frightened both of them. Where are the rest of the documents? Daniel looked toward the filing cabinet, the one standing beside the desk, the one I had not yet opened. My heart began to pound, because suddenly I realized something. The letter in the drawer had not been the entire truth. It had only been the beginning, and somewhere inside that office, Michael had left behind something else. Something both Daniel and Rebecca had hoped I would never find. The filing cabinet stood against the wall beside Daniel's desk. It was an ordinary gray cabinet, 2 drawers, a small lock. Nothing about it seemed important, yet all 3 of us stared at it, because suddenly it had become the center of the room. Daniel looked exhausted. Rebecca looked frightened, and I felt something I had not experienced in years. Determination. I looked at my son. Open it. He swallowed. Mom! Open it. Rebecca stepped forward. This isn't necessary. I turned toward her. After tonight, I think it's very necessary. She folded her arms. Those are private financial documents. I almost laughed. Private, For 6 years, my own husband's plans had been private. My future had been private. My dignity had apparently become private too. Daniel walked slowly toward the cabinet. His hands were trembling. He removed a key from his pocket. The sound of the lock turning seemed unusually loud. He opened the top drawer. Inside sat several folders: insurance papers, mortgage documents, tax records, and one thick blue file. Across the front were the words, McDonald Family Trust. Daniel closed his eyes. I reached for the file. Rebecca immediately spoke. "Tessa, please." I looked at her. "No." She inhaled deeply. "You don't understand everything." "Then explain it." Silence. Because explanations become difficult when truth finally enters the room. I carried the file back to the desk. Emily had quietly taken Olivia downstairs, giving us privacy. The house outside the office had become quieter. Many guests were leaving. The party was ending, but our night was only beginning. I opened the file. Inside were documents organized carefully. Michael had always been organized. Every page had notes, dates, instructions. And there near the middle, I found a letter addressed to Richard Coleman. I began reading. "Richard, if circumstances require your involvement, please ensure that Tessa receives every document personally." My chest tightened. Personally. Michael had wanted me to know. Eventually. I continued. "I love my son deeply, but he sometimes mistakes peace for strength. If he ever allows silence to replace integrity, remind him who he is." Daniel began crying again. Real tears. Not quiet tears. The kind that come when a person finally sees themselves clearly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I looked at him. My son, 41 years old. The little boy who used to run into my classroom after school. The teenager who cried when Michael left for business trips. The young man who once promised me he would always take care of me. "When did you first read this?" I asked. He wiped his eyes. "About a month after Dad died." My heart sank. 6 years. 6 years of secrets. "Did you tell Rebecca?" He hesitated. "Yes." She spoke quietly. "We were married." I turned toward her. "And we made decisions together." "What decisions?" She sat down heavily. "The money helped us." "That wasn't my question." She looked directly at me for the first time all night. "Daniel wanted to invest it." "Did he?" "No." "What happened?" She took a long breath. "The house happened." I looked around the office, the expensive neighborhood, the large mortgage, the image they had built. "You wanted this house." She didn't answer. Daniel did. "Yes." I looked at him. "You..." He nodded. "I wanted to give Olivia a better life." "And your father's money paid for it." "Partly. And his conditions." Daniel covered his face. "I thought I could do both." The sentence broke my heart, because I finally understood. Daniel had never planned to hurt me. He had simply kept postponing honesty. He postponed telling me about the money. He postponed confronting Rebecca. He postponed defending me. He postponed choosing. And eventually, postponing became betrayal. I sat quietly. The anger I had felt earlier was changing. Not disappearing. Changing. Because suddenly, I could see something I had ignored for years. My son was unhappy. The signs had been there. The tired eyes, the drinking, the nervousness. the way he constantly looked at Rebecca before speaking. I thought back to dinner. Every time Rebecca spoke, Daniel became smaller, the same way I had become smaller. Perhaps silence had been hurting both of us. Rebecca suddenly spoke. "You think I'm the villain?" I looked at her. "I think you humiliated me." I was angry. "About what?" She looked down. "Everything." The answer surprised me. I waited. For the first time since I arrived, Rebecca seemed exhausted instead of confident. "The house. The mortgage. The pressure. The expectations." She rubbed her forehead. "Everyone thinks we're successful. And we aren't." The room became quiet. Daniel spoke softly. "We're struggling." I stared at him. "What?" "The mortgage is huge." Rebecca nodded. "My business slowed down." Daniel continued. "We've been using savings." The trust. The remaining money. Suddenly, another piece of the puzzle appeared. I looked at Rebecca. "You were afraid." She laughed bitterly. "Of course I was. And humiliating me helped." Tears appeared in her eyes. Not many, but enough. "You don't understand what it feels like to fail." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My husband died." She looked away. "I know. I spent nights wondering how I'd survive." "I know. I sold his truck because I thought I had no choice." Daniel whispered. "Mom." I continued. "And tonight, you told people I depended on everyone." Rebecca's shoulders collapsed. For the first time, she looked less like a villain and more like a frightened woman. But frightened people can still hurt others, and she had hurt me, deeply. A soft knock interrupted us. Emily stood outside the office. "Most guests have gone." She looked at me. "Do you need anything?" I surprised myself. "Actually, yes." She stepped inside. "I need a ride home." Daniel immediately stood. "I'll take you." I looked at him. "No." His face fell. "Mom, please. I don't want you driving me home tonight." The words hurt him. I could see it. But they were true, because trust had been damaged, and damaged things require time. Emily nodded. "Of course." She quietly left us alone again. I gathered the letters carefully, the original envelope, the trust papers, Michael's notes. I placed them inside my purse. Rebecca looked alarmed. "You can't take those." I met her eyes. "They belong to my husband. They're trust documents. They concern me." Daniel spoke softly. "She's right." Rebecca stared at him. He didn't look away, and for the first time that evening, my son finally chose a side. Not against his wife, not for me, simply for the truth. I stood. My legs felt weak. My heart felt heavier than it had only hours earlier. But something else had changed. For 6 years, I believed Michael had left me alone. Now I knew he had spent his final months trying to protect me. Perhaps he knew me better than anyone. Perhaps he understood that one day I would need these words. As I reached the door, Daniel spoke. "What happens now?" I stopped. The answer should have been easy, but it wasn't. Because I still loved my son. I still loved my granddaughter. And despite everything, part of me still hoped families could heal. I looked back at him. "I don't know." His eyes filled with tears again. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I believe you." Rebecca remained silent. I looked at her. "I don't know if you're sorry." She lowered her eyes, and for the first time all evening, she had no answer. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed one final sheet inside the file. A business card. Richard Coleman, attorney at law. And written in Michael's handwriting were 4 simple words: call him if necessary. For the first time that night, I realized something important. Michael had not simply left behind money. He had left behind a plan. And perhaps tomorrow morning, I would finally discover why. Emily drove me home shortly after 10 o'clock. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. The roads outside Columbus were quiet, and the rain that had threatened all evening had finally begun to fall. The windshield wipers moved slowly back and forth, while the headlights illuminated empty streets. The envelope rested inside my purse. Michael's letters, the trust documents, the business card. Every few minutes, I touched the purse just to make sure everything was still there. Emily finally broke the silence. You don't have to tell me anything. I looked out the window. I know. But if you ever need someone to listen, I turned toward her. Why were you kind to me tonight? She seemed surprised. Because you deserved kindness. Tears filled my eyes again. At 67 years old, I had spent most of my life giving comfort to other people. I had forgotten how it felt to receive it. Emily parked in front of my house. The porch light still glowed exactly as I had left it. Rain fell softly across the front yard. She touched my arm. Tessa, what Rebecca did was wrong. I know. And your son knows it too. I looked toward the dark windows of my home. I think that's part of what hurts. She nodded. Because mothers understand, even mothers who are strangers. I thanked her and stepped outside. The rain felt cold against my face. For several moments, I stood on the porch. This house. The same house Rebecca had called outdated. The same house she had spoken about with embarrassment. Michael had built the shelves in the living room himself. He had painted the kitchen twice because I couldn't decide between colors. He had planted the roses beside the walkway. Suddenly, the house felt alive again. Not old, not outdated, loved. I unlocked the door. Silence greeted me, the familiar silence of widowhood. But tonight, it felt different. Because for the first time in 6 years, I was bringing part of Michael home. I turned on the kitchen light. The clock above the stove read 10:24. The apple pie I had carried to Daniel's house was gone. I realized I had left it behind. For some reason, that made me smile. Perhaps it belonged there now. Perhaps not everything needed to come home with me. I made tea. Chamomile. Michael always hated herbal tea. He used to call it hot grass. The memory made me laugh softly, then cry, both at the same time. I carried the tea into the living room. Michael's recliner still stood beside the fireplace. People had often asked why I never moved it, because it still looked like him. The indentation in the cushion, the small blanket folded over the arm, the reading glasses inside the drawer. I sat beside the chair and removed the documents from my purse. The rain continued outside. The house seemed to hold its breath. I carefully unfolded the remaining pages. One document contained legal language I still didn't understand. Another listed account numbers, but tucked between them was a smaller envelope. This one was different. The paper had yellowed with age, and written across the front were words that immediately stopped my breathing. For Tessa. Only if she needs it. My hands began shaking. This letter was addressed to me. Not Daniel, not Richard. Me. I looked toward Michael's chair, as if somehow he might still be sitting there, as if he might explain why I had never received it. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single, Handwritten letter. The first line broke my heart. My Tess, if you're reading this, then life has become harder than I hoped it would. I closed my eyes. Michael had always called me Tess. Nobody else. Only him. I continued reading. I wanted to give you this letter before I died, but I knew you would refuse to hear certain things from me. Tears rolled down my face. Because he was right. I would have refused. Michael had often worried about me giving too much. He used to say I carried everyone else's pain. I read further. You love people so deeply that you sometimes disappear inside their needs. My hands trembled. After I am gone, promise me one thing. Do not spend your remaining years asking permission to matter. The room became quiet. Even the rain seemed softer. I read the sentence again. Do not spend your remaining years asking permission to matter. For years, I had done exactly that, asking permission, trying not to burden Daniel, trying not to inconvenience Rebecca, trying not to ask for help, trying to become smaller, trying to need less. Michael continued, if our son ever loses his way, remember that his choices belong to him. I felt my chest tighten. He is your child, but he is also a man. You cannot carry his mistakes for him. For 6 years, I had carried them. Daniel's silence, Daniel's distance, Daniel's excuses, every missed holiday, every canceled visit, every disappointment. I always found a reason. Work, stress, marriage, life. Michael seemed to know I would. Another paragraph had been underlined. If anyone ever makes you feel unwanted, leave the room. I remembered standing from the dinner table, leaving, walking down the hallway, finding the office, finding the letters. Perhaps Michael had saved me one final time. At the bottom of the page, another folded sheet rested inside the envelope. It contained only 3 items written in his handwriting. Call Richard. Read the trust yourself. Choose yourself at least once. Choose yourself. I stared at the words. Women of my generation rarely chose themselves. We chose husbands, children, parents, responsibilities, needs, obligations, sacrifices. But ourselves, almost never. The telephone suddenly rang. I nearly jumped. It was after 11. Only one person called that late. Daniel? I stared at the phone. It rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. Mom. His voice sounded broken. What is it? I need to see you. No. Silence. Please. Not tonight. He began crying again. I don't know how this happened. I looked at Michael's letter. I finally answered honestly. I think it happened slowly. He said nothing. For years. His breathing shook. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. I was afraid. I know. I should have stopped her. Yes. The word hung between us. Yes. No excuses. No explanations. Just truth. He whispered, Can you forgive me? I looked toward Michael's empty chair. I thought about the little boy Daniel had been. I thought about the man he had become. And I realized something. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I don't know yet. He began crying harder. I understand. No, Daniel. He became quiet. I think this is the first time you do understand. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, What are you going to do? I looked down at Richard Coleman's card. Tomorrow. The answer suddenly felt obvious. I'm going to call Richard. Silence. Then Daniel whispered, Okay. No argument. No resistance. Perhaps because he already knew. Perhaps because part of him wanted the truth too. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room. The clock passed midnight. The rain finally stopped. I folded Michael's letter carefully. Then I looked at his photograph on the mantel. He was smiling in the picture, 59 years old, wearing his work jacket, standing beside the maple tree. I miss you, I whispered, and for the first time since his death, I felt as though he had answered me, not with words, but with something stronger. Permission. Permission to stop apologizing. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to choose myself. Tomorrow morning, I would call Richard Coleman. And somehow deep inside me, I knew that Michael had left behind far more than money. He had left behind the truth. And I was finally ready to hear it. I slept very little that night. The house felt different after midnight, not because anything had changed physically, but because Michael's words had returned to every room. I walked through the kitchen before sunrise and found myself touching the countertops, the cabinets, the old wooden table where Daniel had once done his homework. For years, I had believed I was simply a widow trying to survive. Now I was beginning to understand that Michael had spent his final months trying to protect me. At 7:30 in the morning, I called Richard Coleman. The phone rang twice. Richard Coleman? His voice sounded older than I remembered, but still strong. Richard, this is Tessa McDonald. There was complete silence. Then he spoke softly. Tessa. He sounded almost relieved. It's been a long time. Yes. Another pause. I was wondering if you would eventually call. The words immediately made my heart race. You knew... Michael thought you might. I sat down at my kitchen table. I found the letters. I see. And the trust documents. Richard was quiet. Finally, he said, Would you be willing to come to my office this morning? What time? 10 o'clock. I'll be there. His office was downtown, the same building Michael and I had visited years ago to sign our wills. The drive there felt strange. I kept hearing Michael's words. Choose yourself. When I entered the building, Richard was already waiting. He was 72 now. His hair had become completely white. He walked toward me slowly. Then, to my surprise, he hugged me. I've missed you, Tessa. I almost cried, because his kindness felt familiar, because he remembered Michael, because he still looked at me as though I mattered. His office had barely changed. The same bookshelves, the same leather chairs, the same photographs. One picture caught my attention. Richard and Michael standing beside a fishing boat. I had never seen it before. Richard noticed. That was 6 months before he became sick. I touched the frame. He never showed me this. Richard smiled. He was terrible at printing photographs. For a moment, we both laughed. Then his expression became serious. I assume you've read the first letter. Yes. And the trust provisions, some of them. He folded his hands. Tessa Michael was very worried before he died. I stared at him. About me, about all of you. The room became quiet. He loved Daniel deeply, but he knew Daniel avoided conflict. I looked down. Yes. He worried that Daniel would sacrifice principles to keep peace. Richard opened a folder. Michael specifically instructed me to intervene if certain conditions occurred. What conditions? He looked directly at me. If you were neglected. My chest tightened. If you were abandoned. I said nothing. If you were humiliated. The word landed heavily. Humiliated. Exactly what had happened. Richard slid several documents across the desk. Michael created the trust with both financial and ethical conditions. I began reading. The language was legal, but one section had been highlighted. The beneficiary shall preserve the dignity, security, and emotional well-being of Tessa McDonald. I looked up. Emotional well-being. Richard nodded. Michael insisted. Tears filled my eyes. He knew me. Very well. I continued reading. If the trustee determines that these obligations have been intentionally violated, remaining distributions may be suspended, reassigned, or restructured. I looked at Richard. What does that mean? It means Michael wanted accountability. Can Daniel lose the remaining money? Richard took a long breath. Potentially. The room suddenly felt smaller. How much remains? Approximately $320,000. The number stunned me. Richard continued. Some investments performed very well. Why didn't you contact me? He looked genuinely sad. I tried. When 3 years ago, I frowned. I never received anything. I sent a letter. My heart stopped. To my house? Yes. I thought carefully. Then I remembered. A letter. Daniel had collected my mail while I was recovering from pneumonia. My hands became cold. Daniel. Richard nodded slowly. He called me shortly afterward. What did he say? He asked whether involving you was necessary. I couldn't speak. Richard continued carefully. He told me you were emotionally fragile. I looked away. Fragile. The word hurt. Because I had spent my entire life being strong. Michael's illness, my parents' deaths, financial struggles, teaching, marriage, motherhood. And somehow I had become fragile. Richard spoke softly. I didn't agree. Then why did you stop? He sighed. Because Michael's instructions required certain conditions. What conditions? He opened another folder. The final document. Michael's signature rested at the bottom. There was one handwritten sentence. If Tessa ever discovers the truth herself, help her stand. I began crying. Not quietly, not politely. Years of grief suddenly returned. Richard handed me a tissue. He loved you very much. I know. No, Tessa. His voice softened. I don't think you fully know. I looked at him. He spent more time discussing your future than his own death. I covered my face. He was afraid you would become invisible. Invisible. That was exactly how I had felt for years. Richard leaned forward. The trust isn't only about money. Then what is it? It's about respect. The office became silent. What happens now? I asked. Richard folded his hands. That depends on you. Can Rebecca challenge it? Perhaps. Can Daniel? Possibly. I looked toward the window. Cars moved below. People walked through the streets. Ordinary lives, ordinary mornings. Meanwhile, my own life felt completely different. Richard spoke again. Michael also left instructions if family relationships became damaged. I looked up immediately. What instructions? He opened another sealed envelope. My breath caught. Michael's handwriting, again. For Richard, if necessary. Richard looked at me. I was hoping I would never have to show you this. My hands trembled. What is it? He slid the envelope toward me. I think your husband saw much further ahead than any of us realized. I slowly reached for it, because suddenly I understood something. The first letters had revealed the money. The trust had revealed the conditions. But this final envelope might reveal Michael's true plan, and perhaps the future of our family. Richard waited quietly while I stared at the final envelope. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's. Even after 6 years, I could recognize every curve of every letter. For Richard, if necessary. My fingers trembled. What does necessary mean? I finally asked. Richard leaned back in his chair. It means exactly what Michael feared. I looked at him. He thought this might happen. Richard nodded slowly. He hoped it wouldn't. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside the office window, traffic moved through downtown Columbus. People hurried to work. Phones rang somewhere in the distance. Ordinary life continued, but mine had stopped. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 handwritten pages. The first line immediately took my breath away. Richard, if you are reading this with Tessa, then our family is hurting. My eyes filled with tears. Even now, Michael seemed to understand exactly where I would be, exactly what had happened. I continued. I do not expect perfection from my son. I only expect courage. Richard lowered his eyes. I read further. Daniel has always wanted everyone to be happy. Unfortunately, people who need approval often surrender their judgment to keep peace. My chest tightened. That was Daniel. Completely. As a child, he hated conflict. If his friends argued, he apologized. If teachers were upset, he blamed himself. If Michael and I disagreed, Daniel would sit quietly until everyone smiled again. Michael had seen it years before I had. The letter continued. If Daniel ever allows another person to shame his mother, he must understand that silence is also a choice. Silence is also a choice. Those words struck me harder than anything else, because Daniel had not insulted me. He had not mocked me. He had not humiliated me. He had simply remained silent. And Michael had somehow anticipated exactly that. Richard spoke softly. He spent many hours writing these. I looked at him. He knew. He worried. I continued reading. Tessa spent her entire life taking care of other people. Her greatest weakness is not kindness. It is that she believes love must always be earned. I stopped, because that sentence reached somewhere very deep inside me. For years I had tried to deserve love, to deserve visits, to deserve invitations, to deserve attention, to deserve respect. As though being a mother was not enough, as though aging somehow reduced my value. Tears rolled down my face. Michael knew. He had always known. The second page contained instructions, specific instructions. If family relationships become damaged, Richard, I ask you to tell Tessa 3 things. Richard nodded toward the page. Read them. I took a breath. First, she is not responsible for Daniel's choices. My voice shook. Second, she must never remain where she is not respected. I paused. The final line blurred through my tears. Third, she deserves joy during whatever years she has left. I covered my mouth. Joy, not survival, not sacrifice. Joy. For so many years, I had stopped asking what I wanted. After Michael died, my world became smaller. I stopped traveling, stopped joining clubs, stopped seeing friends regularly. I organized my life around the possibility that Daniel might call, that Olivia might visit, that holidays might happen. My own life quietly disappeared. Richard finally spoke. "There is one more thing." I looked up. He opened another folder. Inside was a document bearing Michael's signature. "What is it?" "An amendment to the trust." I frowned. When, 3 weeks before Michael died, my heart began to pound. Richard adjusted his glasses. He asked me not to reveal this unless circumstances required it. "Do they?" He looked directly at me. "Yes." I took the papers. The legal language was difficult, but one section had been highlighted. "If trustee determines that conditions of care and dignity have been materially violated, remaining assets may be transferred directly to Tessa McDonald." I stared at him. "What?" Richard nodded. "Michael added that clause." My hands began shaking. "The money could become mine." "Yes. All of it. The remaining assets. $300,000. I sat back, not because of the money, because of what it meant. Michael had trusted me. After all, he had not excluded me. He had protected me. And perhaps he had protected Daniel too. Because consequences teach lessons that love sometimes cannot. I whispered, "Does Daniel know?" Richard shook his head. "No." "What about Rebecca?" "No." The office became silent. For the first time since Michael died, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Power. Not financial power, not revenge, the simple power of truth. My phone suddenly vibrated. "Daniel." I stared at the screen. Richard asked, "Do you want to answer?" I nodded. "Mom." His voice sounded exhausted. "Where are you?" "With Richard." Silence. Then, "Okay." No anger. Only resignation. "I need to talk to you." "I know. I'm coming over tonight." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me wanted more time. But another part understood. This conversation had been waiting for years. "All right." His voice broke. "Thank you." After we ended the call, Richard folded his hands. "What do you want, Tessa?" The question surprised me. Nobody had asked me that in years. "What do you want?" Not what Daniel wants. Not what Rebecca wants. Not what Olivia needs. "What do you want?" I looked toward the window. I thought about my quiet house, Michael's empty chair, the maple tree, my classroom, the years ahead. And suddenly, I realized I didn't know, because I had spent so long living for everyone else. Richard smiled gently. "Perhaps that's the first thing you need to discover." I nodded. Before leaving, he handed me copies of every document, the letters, the trust, the amendments, Michael's instructions. As I placed them inside my purse, Richard said something I will never forget. Michael wasn't preparing for his death. I looked at him. He was preparing for your life. The drive home felt different. The sky had become bright. The rain was gone. For the first time in years, I was not simply a widow remembering the past. I was a woman considering her future. But that future would first require one difficult conversation. Because Daniel was coming to my house, and somewhere inside me, I knew that my son was about to tell me something he had hidden for far longer than the trust. Something about his marriage, something about Rebecca, something that would finally explain why the man I raised had disappeared. and why the frightened man sitting in my son's place had remained. Daniel arrived at my house shortly after 7 that evening. The sun had already begun to set. I watched his car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. For several seconds, he remained inside the vehicle. His hands rested on the steering wheel. His head lowered. He looked exactly like the little boy who used to sit outside the principal's office after getting into trouble at school. Only now he was 41 years old, and the trouble was much bigger. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked tired, older, as though the previous 24 hours had aged him. "Hi, Mom." "Come in." The house smelled like coffee. I had made a fresh pot, even though I knew neither of us would drink much. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once done algebra homework, the same table where Michael had taught him how to balance a checkbook, the same table where we had celebrated birthdays. Life had a strange way of bringing people back to where they began. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "Rebecca knows." I looked at him. "About Richard." He nodded. "And the trust." "How?" I told her. I took a slow breath. "Why?" He stared down at his hands. "Because she's scared." I almost laughed. Scared. Rebecca had humiliated me in front of 30 people, and now she was afraid. "Of losing the house?" I asked. He nodded. "The mortgage is larger than you realize. And we can't afford it." The truth finally came out. For years, they had been living inside an image: success, luxury, the perfect neighborhood, the perfect family. Meanwhile, the reality underneath was falling apart. Daniel rubbed his face. "Rebecca's business slowed down last year." "I know. We've used savings." "The trust." "Yes." I looked toward Michael's old chair. It suddenly made perfect sense. Rebecca wasn't only protecting her pride, she was protecting her future. Daniel continued. "She's terrified that Richard could transfer everything." "He can." "I know." His eyes filled with tears. "I ruined everything." I spoke softly. "No." He looked up. "You ruined your relationship with me." His shoulders sank. "But everything else was already broken." He nodded slowly. The silence returned. Finally, I stood. "I want you to read something." I walked into the living room. From my purse, I removed Michael's final letter. I handed it to Daniel. He read quietly. At first, his face remained still. Then his expression changed, and finally, tears fell. When he reached the sentence, "Silence is also a choice," he stopped reading. He covered his face. Oh God. For several minutes he cried, not as a child, not as a frightened husband, as a son. And perhaps for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to feel everything. I failed him. I sat beside him. "No." He looked at me. "You failed yourself." He stared at me. "Your father believed you were stronger than this." Daniel's voice broke. "I don't know how I became this person." I thought carefully. Then I answered honestly. "One small decision at a time." He nodded, because he understood. Nobody becomes weak overnight. Nobody loses themselves in a single moment. We surrender little pieces. One compromise, one silence, one excuse, until eventually we no longer recognize ourselves. Daniel wiped his eyes. "Rebecca wants to apologize." I looked at him. "Does she?" "I think so." I remained quiet, because I wasn't sure. Guilt and fear often sound alike, and I no longer wanted apologies that existed only because money was involved. Daniel finally asked the question both of us had avoided. "What happens now?" I looked toward the window. Outside, the maple tree moved gently in the evening wind. For years, Michael had protected that tree. Every storm, every winter, every broken branch. Suddenly, I understood why. Some things survive because someone keeps choosing them. I looked back at my son. "Richard wants us all to meet." He nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow." His face became pale. "Rebecca, too." "Yes." He swallowed. "She's going to panic." I almost smiled. Perhaps, but for once, fear belonged to someone else. The next afternoon, we met at Richard's office. Daniel arrived first. He looked exhausted. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes later. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. No perfect makeup, no confident smile, no carefully controlled voice, only worry. Richard greeted everyone professionally. We sat around the conference table. The same documents lay in front of us. The letters, the trust, the amendments, Michael's instructions. Richard spoke first. "Michael McDonald established the trust to protect both his family and his wife's future." Rebecca remained silent. Daniel stared at the table. Richard continued. "The trust included financial conditions." He paused. "And ethical conditions." Rebecca finally spoke. "We understand that." Richard looked directly at her. "Do you?" The room became quiet. He opened the file. "One provision specifically states that Tessa McDonald must not be neglected, humiliated, or made to feel unwanted." Rebecca's eyes lowered. Richard continued. "Mr. McDonald considered dignity an essential condition." Daniel whispered, "Dad." Richard turned another page. "The remaining assets currently exceed $300,000. Rebecca closed her eyes. "And under the amendment signed 3 weeks before his death, those assets may be transferred." She looked up immediately. "Transferred?" Richard nodded. "To Tessa McDonald." Silence. Absolute silence. Rebecca became pale. Daniel looked stunned. Even though he knew consequences existed, he had never expected this. Rebecca finally spoke. "Because of one argument." I looked at her. One argument. The words almost hurt more than the dinner itself. Richard answered calmly. "This is not about one argument." He looked directly at her. "This concerns a pattern." The room became still. Richard continued. "Mrs. McDonald, did you publicly humiliate Tessa in front of guests?" Rebecca said nothing. "Did you describe her as a burden?" Silence. "Did you imply she depended on her son financially?" Her voice became very small. "Yes." Daniel closed his eyes. Richard folded his hands. "Then Mr. McDonald's concerns appear to have been justified." Rebecca suddenly began crying, not loudly, quietly. She looked toward me, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw something I had never seen before. Not confidence, not arrogance, not ambition, fear. Because the image she had built was collapsing. The perfect house, the perfect life, the perfect success. All of it had been standing on a foundation Michael built. And now, his words had finally returned. The meeting ended quietly. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. As we stood to leave, Rebecca looked at me. "Tessa." I waited. She wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry." The room became still. I looked at her for several seconds, and then I answered honestly. I believe you're afraid. Her face fell, because she understood the difference. Fear is not the same as regret, and regret is not the same as change. As Daniel and Rebecca walked toward the door, Richard said something that stopped all of us. "There is one final decision." We turned. Richard looked directly at me. "The trust belongs to you now." And suddenly, for the first time in many years, everyone in the room was waiting to hear what Tessa McDonald would choose. Nobody spoke as we left Richard's office. The elevator ride downstairs felt painfully quiet. Daniel stood beside me. Rebecca stood several feet away. No one looked at anyone else. "The trust belongs to you now." Richard's words continued echoing inside my mind. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. For years, I had believed my future depended on the kindness of others, on whether Daniel called, whether Rebecca invited me, whether my family needed me. And suddenly, for the first time in years, my future belonged to me. Outside, the afternoon air felt warm. Cars moved through the city. People carried coffee cups. Life continued. Daniel finally spoke. "Mom." I turned. "Can we talk?" I looked at Rebecca. She lowered her eyes. Both of us. I considered saying no. Part of me wanted to go home. Part of me wanted silence. But another part understood something important. Families only heal when truth is allowed to finish speaking. "All right." We drove separately to my house. When we entered, Rebecca paused in the living room. She looked around slowly, at Michael's chair, the photographs, the old bookshelves, the piano. For years, she had called this place outdated. Yet now, she seemed to see it differently. I made coffee. Nobody drank much. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "I don't know where to begin." I sat across from her. "Tell the truth." She nodded, and for the first time since I had known her, the confident real estate agent disappeared. Only Rebecca remained. "When Daniel and I bought the house, I thought we were building something." I listened. My parents struggled their entire lives. Her voice shook. "We moved constantly. I shared a bedroom with 2 sisters." She looked down. "I promised myself I would never live like that." I understood more than I expected. Fear often wears expensive clothes. Fear buys large houses. Fear chases success. Fear tries to prove something. She continued. "When we found that neighborhood, I became obsessed." Daniel lowered his eyes. "The mortgage scared me." Rebecca nodded. "But I kept pushing." "Why?" Tears appeared. "Because I thought success would finally make me feel safe." The room became quiet, and suddenly, I saw her differently. Not as a monster, but as a frightened woman who had built her entire identity on appearances. She looked at me. "You reminded me of something." "What?" She struggled to answer. "You seemed content." I frowned. I wasn't. "But you looked like you were." She wiped her eyes. "You lived in this small house. You had friends. You gardened. You spent time with Olivia." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't understand how you weren't afraid." The truth surprised me. All those years I thought Rebecca looked down on me. Perhaps part of her envied me. She continued. "When business became difficult, I started panicking." Daniel quietly added, "We fought constantly." She nodded. I became angry. At me? No. She looked ashamed. At myself. Silence filled the room. Daniel finally spoke. I should have stopped it. Neither of us answered, because we all knew he was right. He looked at me. When Dad died, I felt responsible for everything. The house. The money. The family. He swallowed hard. And I failed all of it. I shook my head. No. He looked surprised. You failed yourself. His eyes filled again. I don't know how to fix this. I thought about Michael. His letters. His warnings. His love. Perhaps this was what he had hoped for. Not punishment. Truth. I stood and walked toward the bookshelf. Inside one of the drawers rested an old photo album. I brought it to the table. Daniel immediately recognized it. Dad's album. I opened it. There was Michael teaching Daniel to ride a bicycle. Michael holding him at age 6. Our first Christmas. Camping trips. School graduations. Rebecca studied the photographs quietly. I stopped at one picture. Daniel at 18. Michael standing beside him, both smiling. On the back, Michael had written something. I read it aloud. Character matters more than success. Daniel covered his face, because even then Michael had been teaching him. Rebecca whispered, I'm sorry. The words felt different this time. No lawyer, no trust, no Richard. Only 3 people sitting at a kitchen table. I looked at her. Why did you say those things at dinner? Tears rolled down her face. Because I wanted to hurt somebody. The honesty surprised all of us. She continued, I was losing clients. The mortgage scared me. I felt like a failure. She looked at me. And you seemed stronger than me. I almost laughed through my tears. I didn't feel strong. But you were. Daniel looked between us, as though he were seeing 2 women clearly for the first time. One who had sacrificed, one who had struggled, both hurting. The afternoon slowly became evening. For hours we talked, really talked, perhaps for the first time in years. About money, fear, marriage, Michael, the house, Olivia, the future. At one point, Rebecca said something that stayed with me. I think I spent years trying to prove I belonged. I understood. Many people spend their lives trying to earn a seat at the table. Meanwhile, Michael had spent his life building one. The front door suddenly opened. Olivia rushed inside. Emily had brought her. Grandma! She ran directly toward me. I held her tightly. She looked around. Everybody's crying. Daniel laughed softly. Pretty much. She looked at Rebecca. Did you apologize? The room became silent. Rebecca nodded. Yes. Did Grandma forgive you? All eyes turned toward me. Children ask the questions adults avoid. I looked at Rebecca, then Daniel, then Olivia. Finally, I answered honestly. I think forgiveness takes time. Olivia considered that. Then she nodded. Okay. To a child, that answer made sense. Because children understand growth. They understand trying again. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room. Michael's letters rested beside me. The trust documents, the photographs, the future. My phone rang. Richard. How are you? I smiled softly. I don't know yet. He laughed. That's fair. There was a pause. Then he asked, Have you decided about the trust? The question returned. $300,000. The house, the conditions, the consequences. I looked toward Michael's chair. For years, I thought his final gift had been money. Now I understood. His final gift had been choice. And perhaps, for the first time in my life, I was ready to make one. Because tomorrow, I would tell Daniel and Rebecca exactly what I intended to do. And that decision would change all of our lives. The following morning woke before sunrise. For years, I had developed the habit after Michael died. Widows often wake early. The house becomes quiet before dawn. And sometimes, the silence feels easier to carry when the world is still sleeping. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Michael's letters lay beside me. The trust documents, Richard's notes, the photographs, the future. For the first time in many years, I realized I had choices. That realization felt both wonderful and terrifying. At 8 o'clock, Daniel called. "Mom, good morning." His voice sounded cautious. "Rebecca wants to come over tonight." I looked out the window. The maple tree moved gently in the morning breeze. "All right." There was a pause. "Have you made your decision?" The question had followed me all night. $300,000. The trust, the house, the consequences. "No." He seemed relieved. "I understand." After we hung up, I walked through the house, the living room, the kitchen, Michael's workshop in the garage. For years, I had thought this house represented my past, but perhaps it also represented my future. I opened the garage door. Michael's old tools still hung on the wall. His workbench remained exactly where he had left it. Inside one drawer, I found something unexpected, a small notebook, his handwriting. I sat on the stool and opened it. Most pages contained measurements, garden plans, repair lists, ordinary things. But on one page, he had written something. "Tessa deserves more than survival." I stared at the words. He had written them years ago, perhaps while he was already sick, perhaps while thinking about the future. Again, Michael seemed to be speaking directly to me. More than survival. For 6 years, I had survived, paid bills, cooked meals, attended holidays, waited for phone calls, accepted loneliness, accepted silence, accepted less. Perhaps it was time to live. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I had not visited Michael in several weeks. The autumn air felt cool, leaves covered the grass. His headstone looked exactly as it always had. Beloved husband, loving father. I sat beside it. I found your letters. The wind moved softly through the trees. I think you knew me better than I knew myself. Tears came again. But these tears felt different, less painful, more grateful. I've spent years trying to make everyone happy. I laughed softly. You probably knew that too. I sat there for nearly an hour, talking, remembering, listening to silence. And somewhere during that hour, my decision finally became clear. Not because of money, because of Michael, because of Daniel, because of myself. That evening, Daniel and Rebecca arrived together. Olivia remained with Emily. Perhaps that was best. Some conversations belong to adults. Rebecca looked exhausted. Daniel looked nervous. I invited them into the living room, the same room where Michael and I had spent countless evenings, the same room where his letters had changed my life. Nobody spoke at first. Finally, Daniel asked, "What did you decide?" I looked at both of them. The fear in Rebecca's eyes was obvious. Not fear of me, fear of losing everything. The house, the money, the future. And suddenly I understood something important. Fear had controlled all of us. Daniel feared conflict. Rebecca feared failure. I feared being unwanted. Michael had spent his final months trying to free us from those fears. I took a deep breath. I spoke to Richard. Daniel nodded. Rebecca remained silent. I asked him about the transfer. Her hands tightened. And I looked directly at her. The money legally belongs to me. She lowered her eyes. Yes. But this isn't about money. Nobody moved. I continued. Michael wanted accountability. Daniel whispered, I know. He wanted respect. Rebecca nodded slowly. I know. And he wanted me to stop making myself smaller. The room remained quiet. I stood and walked toward the fireplace. Michael's photograph rested there. I looked at him before speaking. I am not taking the house. Daniel looked shocked. Rebecca stared at me. What? I turned. I won't force you to sell. Tears immediately filled Daniel's eyes. Rebecca looked stunned. But the word changed everything. Both of them waited. The trust changes. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? I sat again. It means the remaining money stays protected. Rebecca became pale. Protected how? Richard will manage it. She said nothing. It will not be used for the mortgage. Daniel slowly nodded. He understood. The safety net was gone. The illusion was gone. The future would require honesty. Real decisions. Real sacrifices. Rebecca finally spoke. Why? I looked at her. Because Michael didn't leave this money to protect a house. She lowered her eyes. He left it to protect a family. Tears rolled down Daniel's face. Rebecca began crying quietly. But I wasn't finished. There are conditions. Daniel nodded. I understand. You visit. He looked surprised. What? You visit. He stared at me. You call. More tears. You stop treating family like an obligation. His shoulders shook. And Rebecca. She looked up. I will never sit at another table where I am made to feel small. She began crying harder. I'm sorry. This time I believed her. Not completely. Healing takes time. Trust takes longer. But for the first time, I heard regret instead of fear. Daniel suddenly stood. He walked toward me. And for the first time in years, my son hugged me the way he had when he was a child. Completely. Without hesitation. Without distance. He cried against my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. I held him. And in that moment, I realized something. Michael's plan had never been revenge. It had been restoration. He had built consequences. But he had also built a path home. Later that evening, after Daniel and Rebecca left, I sat alone beside the fireplace. The house felt peaceful. The fear was gone. For the first time in 6 years, I no longer felt invisible. My phone buzzed. A text message from Olivia. Grandma, are you okay? I smiled. I replied, Yes, sweetheart. I think I finally am. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree. And somewhere deep inside me, I felt Michael's presence once more, not in grief, not in loss, but in gratitude, because he had left me one final gift. Not money, not instructions, not even the trust. He had given me my own life back, and tomorrow morning, for the very first time in many years, Tessa McDonald would begin living it. 6 months later, I woke up to sunlight pouring through my bedroom window. For a few moments, I simply lay there listening. Birds outside, the distant sound of traffic, the soft creaking of the old house. For the first time in years, the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Life had changed slowly after that night. Not dramatically, not perfectly. Real healing rarely happens that way. It arrives quietly, one conversation, one visit, one honest moment at a time. The maple tree outside my bedroom had begun turning gold again. Autumn had returned. Michael always loved autumn. He said trees were proof that letting go could still be beautiful. I finally understood what he meant. Every Tuesday morning, I now attended a community book club at the local library. Margaret had practically forced me to join. "You spent 35 years teaching children to read," she told me. "Now it's time to enjoy reading yourself." At first, I resisted. Then I met other women, widows, retired teachers, grandmothers, women who had also spent decades taking care of everyone else. We laughed, we shared stories, we drank coffee. And slowly, I remembered who Tessa McDonald had been before grief. I began volunteering at the elementary school nearby. Only twice a week, just enough. The children called me Mrs. McDonald. Sometimes they hugged me. Sometimes they asked questions. Sometimes they reminded me that purpose never truly disappears. It simply waits for us. Daniel visited every Sunday. At first, the visits felt awkward. He would bring groceries, fix things around the house, mow the lawn, almost as if he were trying to repay years of silence. One afternoon, I finally told him, "You don't need to earn your way back." He looked at me. "Then what do I do?" I smiled. "Just come, because you're my son." His eyes filled with tears, and little by little he did. The old Daniel slowly returned, the one who laughed easily, the one who talked about books, the one Michael had loved so deeply. He and Rebecca sold the large house 3 months after our conversation. The decision surprised many people, their friends, their neighbors, their clients. But for the first time, they stopped living for appearances. They bought a smaller home, a practical home, a home they could actually afford. Rebecca found work with a smaller real estate company. She no longer chased luxury neighborhoods. She focused on helping first-time buyers, families, young couples, people who reminded her of her own parents. Perhaps suffering changes us. Perhaps humility does. We never became especially close. Healing does not always create friendship, but respect slowly grew between us. And sometimes that is enough. One afternoon, she visited alone. She brought coffee. We sat in the kitchen. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I spent my whole life trying not to become my mother." I listened. She worried about money every day. Rebecca looked down. "I promised myself I would never feel that fear." "And did you?" She smiled sadly. "Every day." For the first time, I truly understood her. Fear had driven her, not cruelty alone. Fear. The fear of losing status, the fear of losing security, the fear of becoming powerless. She looked at me. "I'm still sorry." I nodded. "I know." That day, something finally settled between us. Not complete forgiveness, not complete healing, but peace. Olivia visited constantly. She spent weekends at my house. We baked pies, planted flowers, read books. One afternoon, she asked, "Grandma?" "Yes." "Are you happy now?" Children always ask the important questions. I thought carefully. Then I answered honestly. "Yes." She smiled. "Good." Because children measure happiness simply, not through houses, money, cars, success, only through love and presence. One evening, near the end of October, Daniel came to my house carrying a small box. "I found this." I opened it. Inside was another letter. My heart stopped. Michael's handwriting. Daniel sat beside me. "I found it in Dad's old toolbox." My hands trembled. "Did you read it?" He shook his head. "No." The envelope simply said, "For Tessa. Always." I sat quietly for several moments, then I opened it. The paper had yellowed. The ink had faded slightly. But Michael's words remained. "My Tess, if this letter ever reaches you, then time has continued without me, which is exactly what I wanted. Please do not spend your remaining years guarding my memory so carefully that you forget to live your own life. Love is not a monument. It is a gift. Take it with you. Laugh again. Travel somewhere. Plant flowers. Eat dessert. Make friends. Forgive when you can. Protect yourself when you must. And remember one thing above all. If anyone ever makes you feel small, remember that you are always the strongest person in this family." I knew it. One day I hope you will know it too. Love, always, Michael. I could not speak. Neither could Daniel. The room remained silent. The fire crackled softly. Outside, leaves fell from the maple tree. Finally, my son whispered. He was right. I looked at him. "About what?" "About you." Tears filled my eyes. For years I had believed my strength came from sacrifice, from enduring, from surviving. But Michael had seen something different. Strength was not suffering quietly. Strength was knowing your worth. Strength was leaving the table when someone humiliated you. Strength was choosing yourself. Strength was loving without disappearing. Daniel took my hand. "I'm proud to be your son." The little boy inside him had finally come home. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone beside the fireplace. Michael's final letter rested in my lap. The house felt warm, peaceful, alive. I looked around the room, the photographs, the books, the old furniture, the memories. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Because 6 months earlier, I had entered my son's house, believing I had become a burden. Instead, I discovered the truth. I was never the burden. I was the foundation. And foundations do not become worthless simply because the house above them forgets they exist. I turned off the lights. Before going to bed, I touched Michael's photograph one final time. "Thank you." And for the first time in many years, I did not say, "I miss you." Because somehow, after all this time, I finally understood. He had never really left. He had simply spent his last days teaching me how to live after him. And at last, Tessa McDonald was ready to do exactly that.